Since time immemorial, indigenous people have lived, traveled, and traded in the Puget Sound region. The Donation Land Act of 1850, to encourage westward expansion, allowed American settlers to claim these traditional native lands. The explosion of immigration into the region that followed forced the U.S. government into a fraught treaty-making process with local tribes. The original terms of the Medicine Creek Treaty were inadequate and ultimately unaccepted by tribal leaders, resulting in war. The Indigenous Voices podcast is an extension of the award-winning Puget Sound Treaty War Panel series and Fort Nisqually Living History Museum. The podcast advances tribal voices in the telling of Puget Sound history and shares tribal knowledge and expertise with wider audiences. Hello, my name is Warren KingGeorge. I'm an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe on my father's side, and on my mother's side, I descend from the Upper Skagit tribe.
Nettsie Bullchild, Nisqually Indian tribe, Director of Archives and Tribal Historic Preservation Office, tribal member and tribal elder.
Haslachel, Togalapo, Deisha, Desiyaya Chulup, Brandon Reynon Titsta, Spalapups Chud, Duflalut Debati, Director / THPO. My name is Brandon Reynon. Welcome. I am the Director and THPO for the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. I'm also a Puyallup tribal member.
Haslachel, Takablu Sitsta, Puyallup Chud. Good day. My name is Takablu. I'm from the Puyallup tribe. My English name is Amber Taylor. I am the daughter of Eric Bennett and Carol Taylor, the granddaughter of Ramona Bennett, Clyde Bill, Patricia Taylor, and Al Taylor.
In the last episode of Season 2 of Indigenous Voices, participants discuss the importance of Native teachings, the benefits of tribal sovereignty for all of us, and the hopes of the Treaty War warriors. To learn more and to see how you can incorporate tribal history into your classroom, please visit our tribal partners' websites.
I had this conversation with an educator in the Highline School District and trying to convey that sentiment to the students of K through 12 in a K through 12 setting. And I suggested to her that maybe instead of looking at it as an obligation, think of it as a responsibility, because it's not you're not doing the tribes a professional courtesy. You're actually fulfilling an obligation that the ancestors of this area, the early settlers, those were the terms that they agreed to, and so you essentially have to explain it in those simple terms, without offending anybody, and I think a lot of people just are not comfortable with the idea of Native people having these rights, having these what they call special extra benefits. I think a lot of people don't understand that, and they think of it in terms of money, obviously, but it's more than that. It's more than there. You really can't put a value on it, and so the sovereignty status really needs to be, I think, more defined in our educational system, and especially get more people comfortable about it, and you do that by education. You do that by exposure, and oftentimes, if you can, bring them out, and we'll take you out, and we'll barbecue a salmon, and we'll share a bucket of steamed clams, and or maybe a handful of salmon berries or salal berries, and we can talk that way. I think it might help our neighbors, our non-native or non-treaty neighbors understand, why these things matter.
I think when you when you think about, how does tribal sovereignty affect non-natives who live all around us? We're all surrounded by apostolates. We're all surrounded by non-natives, right? And how do they benefit from that? And I think you look at, just imagine if you didn't have the tribes having an equal voice nowadays. And we hit it on a past episode too. The things that you enjoy about living here in the Sound region. Think about things you live about living in Western Washington, the beauty of it. 20, 30 years ago, we're seeing today the effects of change. Finally, here we're starting to see cleaner waters. We're starting to see less pollution. Those are because of the tribes having given a voice at the table in the 80s and the 90s, where we have clean water initiatives, we have salmon habitat restorations, we have salmon recovery efforts, conservation efforts that are ongoing, and they're starting to take effect. And so people don't realize that by the tribes having having our sovereignty recognized and getting that voice at the table has actually benefited. They get to enjoy living in our ancestral homelands. They get to have clean water. They get to the sportsmen get to go fish in the Puyallup River or the Nisqually River. Those fish were gone and going to be gone had the tribes not stepped in. There would be no sports fishermen of salmon if it wasn't for the tribes standing up for the rights of the salmon and standing up for the conservation of the salmon, because the U.S. government was allowing commercial fishermen to fish into extinction. Our ancestors used to always say, there's so much salmon in the rivers, you could walk across the backs and not go in the river, right? Those days are gone. And it wasn't because the tribes were fished and hunted 100 and fished 100 salmon a trip. That was because the U.S. government allowed the non-native fishermen, the commercial fishermen, to take thousands, tens of thousands of salmon at a time. And so the tribes had to stand up for the salmon. The tribes had to, and they didn't get listened to until the sovereignty was recognized by the federal government and given that seat at the table, whether it been through the Centennial Accord or whether it was through the Puyallup Land Claim Settlement. Those agreements gave us a seat at the table, and our voice could now be heard. And so everyone, whether you're tribal or non-tribal, enjoy the benefits of our sovereignty when you get to go fishing, when you get to go hiking in a beautiful area of Western Washington, or even Eastern Washington. They enjoy these same rights too. They weren't just limited just to the West side. You get to enjoy our sovereignty in those aspects. People think of us so often as being casinos. That's all they think about. Not realizing that the casinos, yes, while it does give us much benefit financially, is a very small portion of who we are, a very small aspect of what it is to be a sovereign tribal nation. 90% of our work is all about land conservation, fishing conservation, of course, tribal history and tribal preservation as our people. But gaming is not who we are. Gaming is not who we should be defined as. We should be defined as the people who have saved the salmon, who have saved clean water, who are fighting for a clean environment, where you have PSE and this LNG plant that we have on our reservation. We've told you this is going to be bad. Money won out. They had more money than we did. Unfortunately, it's going to come at a cost. We're going to find out the LNG plants. It may not be tomorrow. It may not be next year, 10 years, or 50 years from now. It's going to come out. The tribes are batting 1,000 when it comes to, you shouldn't do this because of this, right? LNG is going to be no different. And so, tribal sovereignty is enjoyed by all. And I think that if people recognize that, they would have a better understanding and a better respect for tribal people.
Well, I'm for, when we talk about this sovereignty, a lot of that, I still get back to, it has to be taught in the schools, in the public schools. We teach it in tribal, but it needs to be taught in the public schools, and it needs to be taught by tribal people, not these non-Indian teachers. We get back to that, like, you don't need a degree to be able to go in and do these things, to teach this stuff. But, and I give Warren's late dad, Hoagie, that's one of the things that I think he was the strongest at that. He was always one that wanted that taught and wanted it taught correctly, willing to speak. My husband's dad, he was Blackfeet, but he was the same way. Our elders were very adamant about teaching and teaching the right way from their experience, that they weren't just going to go in and tell this teacher, well, you should teach kids this and all, that's how they were very good at going into the public and teaching what was, what they were taught. So as we go through this, we're always looking out for the next generation. I feel that's what a lot of the tribal people do, because that's the way it was. You were always watching over your family, whether it was your immediate family or your other, tribal family. But, it's always about the next generation because, that's what oral history was it was always be able to hand it down. You didn't have to write it down. We did the ceremony with Puyallup just recently, and that was, other people were, they were uplifted by it, to see that you had younger people saying how appreciative they were to be able to witness this, how they were happy to be there. It wasn't a chore for them to go and see this. It wasn't something they had to do or that they were paid to do. They went because this is what they wanted to learn. My son was there, and that's what he said. He said, I just love sitting and listening to you guys talk history. Everybody talks history and seeing the ceremony, see how these people do this. So, it's always that, we're always looking out for our next generation, that a lot of these things that the sovereignty part that's always been there, that they understand, it will always be here, but you have to tend to it. You have to take care of it. You have to pass it on, in the best way you can. So that's why, like I said, learning these ceremonies, not so much as the non-tribal values. I know they're out there. You're like, it's good for our kids to go to school. It's good for them to learn. But you also have to put in that culture. That culture has to be there. They have to know who they are, that identity. They have to be proud of this, and they have to be able to speak it. So, how I got involved with this was because of my daughter-in-law and my niece that went to college, didn't have a clue, when they went to tribal studies. And I was like, there's something wrong with this picture. So, as an elder, it's my responsibility to speak up. Warren's dad was the same way. It was, his responsibility, and they did it. We did these things that sometimes, like I get very nervous. I'm not comfortable, but I know it's important, for the next generation to be able to be comfortable to be like on a podcast, talking about history, on a board, on a committee, on a tribal council. They have to be comfortable to do this. There's a lot of things that I don't know because, like I said, I was young, but I remember the stories. I remember the stories my parents, my aunts, my grandparents told us, so that hopefully gets passed on. But in that, those teachings, I think if people would just understand, there was the things that we had before the treaty. The treaty is always pushed up in our face. The treaty is, they stereotype us into, like, Amber was saying, oh, they, drunks and all this. You still see the movies, you still see the television shows that show this, but trying to change that is a big thing that I feel we need to do for our next generation so they're comfortable passing on and keeping that sovereignty, to know what sovereignty means. That's the big thing for them, is they have to know what it means. It's not just a word, and it's something like I tell around here, I tell people, what are you going to leave your tribe when you're gone? You need to think about that, because your voice is very important, empowering our younger generation, to be able to do this stuff. So when we had the podcast with the younger generation, I was really happy with that. I really liked that because, they were showing what they learned, they were embracing it. And, so I think that's one of the ways that I guess we would try to get that down to the non-Indians, like hanging on to the sovereignty, but also making sure that it's there generation after generation. what we're trying to do and why we're doing it. But, like I said, here we are. Hopefully people are listening. I hope our own people are listening, for this thing to know that it's important for you to have that voice, speak up about it.
When you think about how we realize the hopes of the warriors who fought in the treaty wars, I think about what they were fighting for. They were fighting for the right to live as much of our traditional ways. I think many of them understood what was coming. I think they could see this non-native arrival coming faster than they had anticipated, and the quick impacts. I mean, the non-settlers, sure. I mean, they started tearing things down real fast. They came in and pretty much burned the place down, figuratively and literally. And so I think they were now understanding we need to fight for who we are as a people, our way of life, our hunting, our fishing, our gathering, where we need to gather for, where we need to live as a people. And so I think, have we realized the hopes? I think, as I see within my own community, my own tribal community, there's definitely times where I know our ancestors are like, "What the freak?" Right? Like, what are you doing? But I think for the most part, I think we have. I think we still are a community. We still, just like any standard community. I know our ancestors had bickerings. That's why I have so many villages around here. I mean, it's like, it was, people think of villages as being, and Nettsie taught me this too a long time ago. You think about villages where, these big groups. Well, no, they were family communities. It was small groups of families that lived along these areas. Yes, we're all considered Puyallup, but you think about they must have been disputing just like we do today. And I don't like you. I'm going to go live down the river. And they established that family there. And so, the family connections go up and down every creek and river and lake you can think around this area. So we have those infightings. We still have those arguments. But as a whole, we're still a community. As a whole, we fight for each other. We come together as needed. We had recently in our own apartment, we had a incident where a family member was lost, and the representation that came from the county officials, the police officers, was minimal compared to the amount of volunteers you had. This was at 11 o'clock at night, midnight, 1 o'clock. We were searching till 1 o'clock in the morning. It was mostly led by Puyallup tribal community members who were fighting. We were trying to find one of our own who were lost. And so I think that sense of community is still alive and well. I think the sense that, we still fight just like they did, just like in the Second Treaty War. We learned from our parents, who learned from their grandparents and their parents. Those traditions of fighting are still here. We're still fighting for to fish, where to hunt. Our fishing grounds are continually being shrunk. Our hunting grounds are continually being attacked and shrunk with as people move out and buy property, and small forest owners continue to grow their forests, and they're buying public land that is ours to hunt on. So we continue those fights. We continue to, but most importantly, we continue to speak our language. We continue to practice those same cultural practices that we've been practicing since 15,000 years ago. Those are still alive and well. We still share the stories. We meet it as a community throughout the year, telling the same stories that were told a millennia ago. And so I think that we have we realized their hopes? I don't know, but I know that we've honored their hopes the best way that we can.
I think I think so much of what we do as a community, we think of our ancestors, and we think of our 7 generations, our next generations, where we'll be their ancestors, and our treaty warriors really had to fight to live. Our second treaty warriors really had to fight to live. And whatever battles we have coming up ahead, I know that we'll continue to be a community. These, our tribes, our Medicine Creek Treaty tribes, our Washington State tribes will continue to stand together, whatever hardship comes. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that when you look in terms of our people, our family, all of our tribes in this area, we're all family, as many of our panelists have already said, very interrelated. We're going to continue to be a family. We're going to continue to, fight for our sovereignty and make those people stand up to their word. And I think that'll continue. We don't know what's coming next, whether, we LNG and the dams being removed and all of the things that are happening in our communities. I know that we all come together as a unit, and I think that in itself is beautiful. And we're still alive, and we're still a tribe. We're still a recognized tribe, and we do have a seat at the table, and I think that's wonderful.
Like Brandon was saying, he had said in previous episodes, I don't think they thought we were still going to be here, and we're still here. So I think that's a part of, the warriors having that in our blood, that, we still fight for our people, and that's what the warriors did. I still think a lot of us still sacrifice like they did. There's a lot of sacrificing that you have to do just to be able to help your tribe, help your family. So it is, you do what you were taught, what the history has taught you, what, like I said, oral history, helping our people. Like I always feel that for Nisqually, they condemned the land for where JBLM was, and in that, our people, no one was left behind. They had to move. They were given so long, but they moved them right away. There were still people living out in the woods, with no houses. Nobody cared, but the people took care of their own. And so they would go check on them. But it was to the point that you even were concerned about the ones that passed away. You weren't leaving them behind. And that's kind of a teaching that I guess it's not spoken, but you just know you take care of them also. So like I said, with the ceremony Puyallup had, and, we've been to Muckleshoots too, but, that's a part of, I guess, what you would think maybe the warriors would, I guess, appreciate. I don't know another word, but, that to see that happening, that it wasn't just something that was a responsibility. It was something that you learned and that you were taught and that you were shown, and to do it the right way. And like I said, at the ceremony, we had like young people there that were just, talking history that I was looking at them like, that. So, it was good to hear that, you feel comfortable knowing that's going to be passed on. So I think, the big thing is I know our ancestors, and especially the warriors, sacrificed so much that we can never fill their shoes, but we can pick up where they left off. And so I hope in the next generation, that's the same thing they do, is that we leave enough for them, that they can pick up where we left off. And that's what I was saying. If there's not enough fish out there for, our next generation to fish, they have the gooey duck, they still learn how to do that. So there's, and a lot of the young people will talk about that, with like, we've touched on the canoe journey. What you hear from them is a lot of them, even the young ones, they're like, we want to be on the water. We want to be out there. And you're like, we're all thinking, you don't need to go out there. That's really dangerous. But it's in their blood. They know we want to be out on that canoe, and we want to be, we want to be on the water. And so every year, there's this excitement about that. So I think a lot of that, has been passed down. Like I said, some of those have happened because of the warriors, what they fought for. It was everything. It wasn't just one thing, but it was everything, and that, we need to keep moving on it.
I'd like to think that that those of us who have embraced the challenge to continue the good work that our ancestors laid down in 1854 and even prior. If in 1854, think about the settlement. Think about pre-settlement. Think about when this country was wild and there were nothing but Atzish Tabilch. That's all there was. Those were our neighbors. We didn't have to worry about these new people coming in. And that's what I like to think our warriors were drawing the line and saying, this is, we can't forget about that. We have to remember who we are and where we come from. And we need to establish those permanent areas where we can continue what their elders shared with them. And so what you're hearing now are echoes. You're hearing, you're seeing reflections of those warriors. My late father was able to identify these bloodlines, and the people that you see on this panel are descendants of those very same people who laid down their lives, who gave their own blood, sacrificed their own lives to ensure that we will always have a place here in this Puget Sound area to call home. And it's something that I really take a lot of pride in, and I'm really proud to say that I'm Native American, and that these areas here, these cities and these towns, even though they're expanding and they're developing and they're really building on top of all of our ancestral grounds, it doesn't erase the fact that we as Native people, our ancestors roamed this area and called it home and lived off the resources of these places long before anybody else. We're the only ones that can say that. We're the only ones who can say that we were here when the glaciers receded 14,500 years ago. We were here. Our ancestors saw that ice age. Our ancestors saw this land grow. And, the people that you see on this panel, the people that you hear on this panel, they all have this unique perspective and have and have their very own testimony to share and to encourage. The type of commitment that is required to carry on this good work, to carry on these good memories, to carry on these good names, that these warrior names. It really takes quite a toll because you're forced to live in two worlds. You've got to live this non-native corporate career world, where you worry about your phone bills and you worry about your mortgage payments and you worry about your bank account. But in the other world, it's completely opposite. We want to, our old timers, our teaching say, well, let's give it all away. We know where to get more of it. Let's give all our salmon away. I know where to catch some more. Let's give all of our clams away. I know where to go dig some more. Let's give all of our deer and elk meat away. I know how to get some more. That was the old way. That was the old teaching. Our neighbors need help. We're going to give them what we can to help. In this day and age, we're living paycheck to paycheck, and we're trying to figure out how to keep nice coats and nice shoes on our kids' feet, but we're still finding ways, right, to anchor ourselves. We're finding ways to make the ends meet, and we're also finding ways to continue the work that we were handed down from our elders. And it truly has been an honor to sit with these folks on this panel and to listen to their perspectives and to listen to their testimonies and listen to the good words that are being shared here. It really is a wonderful, I guess a wonderful experience to hear the people talk about our obligations, to talk about our successes, and to also talk about our failures, to talk about our lessons that we've all learned. And I think, in from my perspective here, I'd like to think that yes, we have fulfilled our obligation to our beloved warriors, our Bullchild, who really have set the bar really high, and I'm happy that through this program and through our networks that we're able to fulfill at least some of what we're supposed to be doing here in this year 2024, in this modern world in 2024, that we're doing the best we can with what we've got.
One of the things that I always remember, it always caught my attention when Brandon had said that, when he said when he's had to go out in the field and at these sites, and he finds an artifact, he said, and then when you hold it, he said, you stop and think, my ancestor probably held this. It really makes you think that's, like I said, when he gets back to, we're still here. They probably didn't expect us to still be here, but just to think about that, you could be holding artifacts, just like your baskets, they're your grandmother's. And it's like at one time, they handled them also. And it gives you that connection, it gives you that permanency of, your ancestors being around you and with you. But, it brings you back to that. So I think that's one of the things that I've always thought of, like with these panels, that I wish other people could feel that way. They could feel and see and hear some of the things that we talk about, that we've actually experienced it.
And all that to Warren's comments too. He really think about your dad, Hoagie, all the work he did with the treaty warriors, the knowledge that we have from all his work, and what he always told us about it was, they came from these different, they were us disputes, like you said, they came from everyone. But they banded together and worked together, and they were successful. The treaty wars, we were one of the very few tribal nations that came together and fought together and won. We beat the U.S. government. We won that war because we came together. And you think that continues today. And you said it before, Warren. All of us on this panel are descendants of a treaty warrior, and so we're honoring them in the fact that we still continue to fight. We don't do it individually. We do it as a group. We band together on issues. We come together, whether it be salmon, whether it be hunting rights or whatever. The tribes band together, and so we definitely are doing that. Hey Shaba, Nisqually, for joining us for the Indigenous Voices podcast. Indigenous Voices is available wherever you get your podcast. Follow and subscribe at fortnisqually.org.
This podcast is generously supported by the Pierce County Historic Preservation Grant,
as well as representatives from Puyallup, Nisqually, Squaxin, and Muckleshoot.
Music by Vincent Johnson, Nooksack, Lummi, and Nishani Johnson, Jamestown, Sklallam, Lummi.